Yeah, hello. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome. And just before we start the formal session, because of the situation in India, I have to make this announcement. We are all very much worried. Every house and family is affected there. And so a lot of people and groups are doing whatever they can do. So we are planning on May 15 a relief fundraiser um, for UP and Delhi region. And we will be targeting only for oxygen cylinders, medicine, and doctors' appointments. So for that, whatever fund is needed, we hope that you all will generously support us. And please let me know or other co-hosts personally about your commitment, and we will let you know how to donate, okay? So please, you can write in the chat or in personal emails to me. And let's go on the next slide. Faisal. It is on today's event. And welcome, Dr. Aminah Beverly Al-Deen. And the topic is, of course, conversation on the status of Islam in America in continuing pandemic. We have invited Dr. Bozam Siddiqui, a very well-known scholar in our region and part of our Indian Diaspora group. He is a director of South Asian Desk. He's a former director of South Asian Desk at Voice of America. And he is going to do a formal introduction on the speaker. So welcome, Dr. Bozam Saab.
So thank you. And Assalamu alaikum, Professor Dr. Aminah Beverly McCloud Al-Deen. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce a distinguished scholar, and Professor Aminah has been a Professor Emeritus at DePaul University, and she has been the Professor of Islamic Studies in the Islamic Studies Department. Also, she has been uh, one of the very important members of the faculty in that institution. She has uh, also written books on uh, Islam in America in general, in the area of religion, history, anthropology, culture, all those fields, and Islam in America, also Islam in the international perspective. And she has also been quite active in producing a television program, and she has been a Fulbright scholar. She has been the editor-in-chief of Journal of Islamic Law and Culture. And with before I introduce and I give the microphone to Professor Al-Deen, I would very briefly like to introduce that American history in Islam, I mean in America, it dates back to 400 years at least. And the coming of Muslims in America uh, took place before the uh, Protestants came to America from Europe. And one name that comes to mind is that of Umar ibn Said, who was brought to America as a slave, and he was a scholar in his own right, and he had written his autobiography in Arabic. And that book has been translated by Professor Hasselby. He was a scholar at Harvard, Yale, and he taught at American University of Beirut. And that book was published in 2016. So ever since that time, the connection with Islam and America has been quite, deep, especially when it comes to the African slaves who were brought to America, and the history, you all know different phases of how Islam on the part of the African immigrants and African slaves who were brought here prospered in America, and how they sought refuge in Islam. And Dr. Aminah is also, as I said, a special scholar in this field. And with this brief introduction, I would like to introduce and welcome very wholeheartedly in our midst to start his lecture. And we are eagerly waiting to hear what she's going to say. Professor Al-Deen.
Oh, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. I think it's only appropriate that we take a moment for prayers and thoughts about that part of the Muslim body in India, which is really, really suffering now. Many of us were up all night for Muslim Network TV to see how we could pay a tribute, but also to let people know what's going on over there, because the news is kind of spotty here if you're listening for it in English. So I would ask that we take a moment for those of you who have relatives and friends, I have acquaintances, to pray. Okay. I was asked by Reza, and I want to thank him. I don't know how he found me, but to give a talk with you today. A couple of you I do know, but it is such an honor to be with you today. And it's also a little bit of a strain reflecting on what's happening there. And yesterday on the BBC News, I was listening to a man lamenting that it was Ramadan and he couldn't fast because he was busy digging graves and burying people. And I kind of felt that anything I did was just so minimal, given what the people there are having to deal with. But then on the other side, there were so many other people who were cooking and bringing food to the people who were lined up trying to get loved ones some oxygen or some assistance. That I know it just makes what I have to talk about today seem a little secondary. So bear with me. And I thought about what I would talk about. Where is Islam in America? And in talking about that, it became interesting to look back over, say, the last decade to see where Muslims are and what we're doing and how we fared. And I wanted to start with saying that during the beginning of the Trump era, many Muslims liked what he was doing, especially those with means, but because it increased their economic pockets. Across the US, many immigrant and first generation in the US Muslims were playing a necessary and increasingly necessary part in the nation's economy. And we still do. They had been and were continuing to bring family members here using the family reunification provisions of the Immigration Act. Many had become business pioneers, entrepreneurs, able to employ the less fortunate members in their ethnic communities. The thing that was interesting was how quickly Muslims, especially those from the Indian subcontinent, I hate calling it a subcontinent because it's really a continent all by itself, but how quickly Muslims began to establish themselves and make national brands which had not been here before, like edible arrangements, for example. By 2018, physicians from Muslim cultures numbered already about 500,000. About 1/5 of the nation's physicians. Simultaneously, Muslims continue to live quietly, contributing to the nation's growth, not getting much acknowledgement for that, but doing it all the same. Muslims continue to contribute to the politics, the social fiber, and diversity, despite another rise in terrorism against Islam and Muslims. Muslims come from over 77 countries, representing Sunni, Shia, and Sufi. In the 2008 election, Muslim immigrants and their children voted Republican. Some voted because Obama was Black and they didn't want to vote for him. Many more, however, voted because Republicans wooed them. I have an Indian friend who lives in Florida, and he was talking about how Republicans went out of their way to make sure that Muslims sat on various councils in the city, how they got invited to things. So in one way, the Republicans made a seat for themselves in Muslim communities. By 2012, however, the tide turned, probably because of what the Bush family did with regard to Muslims around the world. Researchers speculated that this was because Obama's immigration policies continued to be favorable to Muslims, especially in the area of tech visas and healthcare visas. Though very questionable at the border. He did not straighten out the immigration policy at our southern border. For many white, Native, and Black American Muslims, however, their social economic status remained the same. For Blacks, the caste system was still in play, whether the president was Black and Democrat or white and Republican. Also, by 2018, dislikes between Black and brown and immigrant American Muslims began to turn distasteful. And they continue to be, although they're moving in a good direction today. Simultaneously, there have been another rise in Islamophobia, or more accurately, anti-Muslim bias. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the nation's largely first-generation immigrant civil rights organization, has consistently taken on the litigation of Muslim claims against employers, organizations, and individuals who perpetrate violence or hate crimes against Muslims. More veiled Muslim women had made these claims than men. perhaps because they dressed as other Americans do. So you couldn't tell if the men were Muslim or not. Here is where one rift in the overall community has persisted, and we'll come back to that. African American Muslims are considered Black first and treated in society as Blacks. Their religious perspective is known as diverse, and thus it recedes into the background. Immigrant and immigrant descendant Muslims are encountered by their appearance, clothing, accent, and the recent history of terrorism, usually globally. Unfortunately, any violence any Muslim does in the world is attributed by some Americans to Muslims here. Though Islam has been known and its faith community of Muslims, as was said earlier, in this country since its founding, it has been an adversarial relationship from the often hostile relationships in Europe. It is important to remember that the Western imagination of Islam and Muslims, but that also includes Hindus, Christian Arabs, etc., has been contentious for 15 centuries. It is embedded in the subconscious knowledge, which has been in school textbooks, in preachers' sermons, in founding documents for all of America's history. The only way many Americans have been able to overcome it is through travel and personal experience. Also, unfortunately, these large-scale experiences have taken the form of interreligious dialogue, which has been largely unsuccessful in deterring the actions of vandals, arsonists, and perpetrators of violence, rather than participation in neighborhood activities, music, and local sports. The Trump administration ushered in increased economic activity, increased social polarization, increased number of hate crimes, and increased public use of profanity. Despite this, some Muslims expressed in a Pew Research Center report that random people expressed support for them because they were Muslim. How they knew this is unknown. You have to have something on that says, I'm Muslim. Recently, with the tragedy that's unfolding in India, many people ask, which is in itself a mercy. They ask, they want to know, they say, I'm concerned, what can I do? And that's a plus. Among Muslims who approved of Trump's presidency, despite his bans and general antipathy toward Muslims, 3/4 said that they were pleased with the direction he was taking the country. In this survey, 60% of those Muslims say that they feel that media coverage of Muslims was unfair. In recent months, under Biden, obviously, Muslim women have been pushed in commercials across mainstream TV for everyday products, which shows a little bit of a shift. Whereas the two Muslim congresswomen were unflatteringly portrayed during Republican efforts to unseat them during the Trump era. Today, portions of their agendas have been taken up and taken seriously by the Biden administration. COVID-19 put a spotlight on the Trump administration's ability to handle crisis. No matter whether you believe the pandemic a hoax and the dead imaginary or not, the handling of information to protect the public was terribly unsuccessful. By the end of March last year, many cities were coming to terms with the necessity of dealing either with the pandemic or with the 24-hour coverage of a pandemic. Muslim physicians stamped down their fears and began to read everything they could and search for PPE for long days and nights in hospitals, which were turned virtually into ICUs. Few physicians had spent much time in the ICU prior to this, with its overwhelming demands. Now all hands were expected to be on deck, from the physician to the janitor. Care of the Muslim patient was not a specialty any longer, as whichever physician was on call was the physician available. Some Muslim patients died without family or clergy, as this continues to happen today. For a time, bodies were just put in refrigerated carts as funeral homes were full. And we're seeing another replica of that today without the refrigerator trucks. Ramadan began in the last week of April last year, and another panic set in. What happens when usual practices are absent? Well, Zoom came to take over, because it answered some questions, but it barely fed the souls already begging to be fed, as they were starved for company in prayers and meals. No Hajj, and I think Hajj is postponed this year too, except for a few that live right there in Saudi Arabia. Imams, mental health workers, and community leaders stamped down their fears, retooled, and Zoomed to give regular talks, seminars, classes, and of course, Juma, to lift spirits and provide outside contacts. The spiritual and mental toll on Muslim families, as with the rest of the nation, continues to be deep. Both spiritual and mental health therapy sessions were on Zoom. The number of Muslim psychiatrists and psychologists is unfortunately tiny, too small to handle the attempted suicides, anxieties, and depressions, and they still are happening. We have clusters that many of us who research are trying to look at today. Few imams were also trained as mental health care workers. This is something for us to think about for the future. This situation continues as few Muslims, regardless of their ethnicity, are going into therapy. Here in Chicago, I'm in Chicago, the waiting list for the Khalil Center, which is one of the few mental health facilities, and it's not really a facility, it's in virtually, is over 400 as of yesterday. By the end of May, George Floyd was murdered by a policeman putting his knee on his neck for over 9 minutes. Muslims were involved because the owner of the store that called the police was Muslim. And that owner insisted police were called. Protests broke out, starting from the store and branched out into the world with video. For Muslims, that another immigrant family made its living off Black neighborhoods caused a lot of angst. People in that particular neighborhood in Minneapolis knew each other. This owner called the police even after one of the employees volunteered $20 from his pay. From Chicago, members of Iman, and I don't know if you in Washington know about Iman, can you say yes or no, so we can make this a little bit of conversation here, went to Minneapolis to speak with a number of immigrant store owners in Black communities. All refuse any negotiation. While we've been intent on interreligious dialogue with people who are already fairly sane, we have not even had interreligious dialogue with those who wish to do us harm. And we've had very little intra-religious dialogue. As COVID raged on, so did more murders and protests. Muslim organizations, their editorial boards and their writers condemned it in print, which has become a habit. And I know that there's some journalists here with us today. You can condemn yourself out of relevancy. If everything that happens is bad, I condemn, but you don't do. Muslim college students, however, and young adults joined the protesters to the chagrin of many of their families who wish to just continue a kind of quiet presence, not realizing it's this group today, it'll be you tomorrow. Because Trump's administration has stoked a kind of native tendency that in this country is hard to quell. Some Muslim cultures, as you well know, extol whiteness. I've looked at the videos. I've laughed at, I have to admit, I've laughed at them. And I've been in the country, so I have seen many of the billboards, etc. And I know historically where it comes from. But in this country, it belies and goes against what we understand to be a Muslim ummah. It's a kind of conversation that we must have in order to be successful as Muslims and to be good, progressive citizens of this country. Many organizations, and I don't know if you've heard of Muslim Arc, but Muslim Arc is a Muslim anti-racist collaboration. And what they do is they give workshops, excuse me, on how to recognize our own implicit bias, and all of us have implicit bias. You know, racism, anti whatever bias doesn't just exist in one group of people. All of us have a little taste of it. And some of the organizations actually fought amongst themselves over things like, we don't want to be known as supporting Black Lives Matter. Well, all of us are reading the Quran. We're praying every day. And if we don't stand for justice anywhere there's a need to take a stand, then we won't stand for justice anywhere. And I think that that is important also for us to have a conversation about this afternoon. But these groups, and I'm thinking about two organizations, one in Texas and one here in Chicago, they fought over having others see them as supporters of Black Lives Matter. And nobody wants to be thought of as a racist. It's just anti something or the other. And much of that is unconscious. I'm a firm believer that a lot of it comes out in conscious ways, but a lot of the deeply held things are very unconscious. As both COVID and protests continued into the summer of 2020, we missed an opportunity to act as mediators. Some Muslim women had moved to be predominant in spaces of learning. And I, for one, and I don't see many women on this call, but I, for one, was cheering that there were women whose classes I could attend. I could benefit from a world of knowledge. I was really, really cheering it on. Other Muslim women began taking their classes almost as a preference. Women had an opportunity, those who had young kids, to put them down or to send them off to do their remote learning. All kinds of good things were happening, even though we hated our quarantine. Women chaplains came into the mainstream. And again, women turned to them. But as you can see, there are some things that are popping up in this particular Western diaspora that are new in Islamic thought. Chaplaincy is new to Islamic thought. The fact that you could have men and women chaplains, and are they also imams? Women began to call themselves ustada, this, that, or the other. Nobody knew, no more than they knew from imams, what their credentials were, but they were in various places representing all of us. COVID continued to hang around, keeping many schools and workplaces empty. I fortunately retired 3 years ago, so I kind of have been able to sit back and watch this and thank Allah that I'm not still teaching anything anywhere. And it's been interesting. Inner city Muslims continued the food pantries. Muslims themselves learned and are in the process of learning that in order to be a citizen of the world, you have to treat the world, not just yourselves, but the world. It can't be, although today India is on our plates and we must pay it attention, tomorrow it'll be another place. And we must pay it attention too. We are in the process of learning to come out of our ethnic bubbles, not leave them, but to come out of them to see the world around us And that is important. And I would like the flyer that preceded my talk. If you could just send that to me, I'd appreciate it so I can pass it along. But we have to come out of our ethnic bubbles to see those around us, Muslim and non. If we're supposed to work to change societies for the better, we can't do that if we only treat those in our group. One of the things we're pushing additionally, and I'm going to ask Razi to come with me on Muslim Network TV, is it's important. Muslim Network TV is the only TV station run by Muslims here in the United States. We're trying to cover a lot. I am praying along with others that we survive, but if Muslims don't support it, we won't. We report both on the world and on things happening here in the United States and Canada. It has been an interesting experience for me as we've tried to make the host on Muslim Network TV as diverse as humanly possible. And we all have fights because everybody wants to push, of course, their agenda. But in this place, our tasks, and I've looked at the quarantine and the pandemic as a reckoning. And how we are able to deal with our reckoning is, I think, one of the largest tests we'll have in our lifetimes. It's one thing to read in the Quran about Noah and Prophet Lut and all of these people, because we can put them in a past way behind us. But when it is staring us in the face and how we handle it becomes important, because that is what it is. With regard to, we have a couple of research groups, and it's still very early yet to get all the surveys and interviews done that one needs to report, but I ran across an interesting article. Do you know what ISPU is? Yes, no? Razi, do you know what ISPU is?
No, I don't.
It's the, what is it? It is a Muslim-based research group, an Institute for Social and Policy Understanding. And although their research is not as good as it should be, they improve constantly every year. And they have begun, it's still going on, to do some research tests to look at what is the ethnic composition of Muslims. And one of the things they found was that although there are very few white Muslims, white American Muslims, what has happened in the last few years is that Arab Muslims have started to try to get themselves classified as white, which is very interesting for white America, who knows that they're not white because they don't have quote unquote European heritage. So it's an interesting kind of thing. I can get by the caste system because I will say I'm white. Every time I get to check a box that says I'm white, I will check that box. But you have a whole white population saying, no, you're not. You're not Irish. You're not Scottish. You're not, your ancestry does not lay in those places. So while ISPU is fighting its way along, the Pew Research Center in Washington is steadily collecting statistics, and Muslims have made it difficult because Native American Muslims, white American Muslims, African American Muslims, and Latino Muslims don't tend to have identifiably Muslim last names. So it's getting really touchy as they try to figure out how to count us. And if there's anything we learn in Western civilization, is that it has come to rule the world because it counts things. It puts things in categories. And we flow in that, you know, as a former professor of Islamic studies, teaching my students, largely white American students, about the Muslim world was most difficult because of geography. For many of them, Pakistan is one country, India is another country. They do not lie anywhere near each other. Bangladesh could have been in Antarctica for all they knew. I mean, I became mostly a teacher of geography. Also, the thing that in this me generation that is missing is empathy. The other morning on a prayer line in the African American community, one entire prayer talked about the body. And it talked about that if we didn't get concerned about that Indian part of our bodies and get as much money, goods, find out who we could join, where and how, to do our fair share for that part of our body that is suffering now, then we didn't deserve to be called Muslims. And it was very important because in all my years as being Muslim, I'd never heard a prayer like that. And hopefully it will amount to something, which is why I need that flyer. And I'm going to end here to have a little conversation because I know that many of you have to get back. I don't know, what is India is about 9-10 hours ahead of us on the phone as people try to reach people, etc. But to end here for conversation with you. Thank you very much for your attention and for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was quite enlightening and quite challenging also for us to initiate this process of conversation where we are missing the train and what we are supposed to do and how much we are not doing. So I think this opens really for the conversation that you have asked for. And I challenge our audience to ask really tough questions or bold question, or at least express themselves what they intend to do to be in the mainstream of America as a Muslim, as a moral citizen, as a model citizen, and as the part of Ummah. So please, Dr. Rafat Hussain, take over for the question answer session.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. I don't see.
I have raised my hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Abdul Jabbar.
So fantastic. The lecture, very brief. I was very impressed. Thank you for this is kind of question. I think I will ask a question very personal, but I think if you don't want to answer, that's fine, because I am born into a Muslim family somewhere in this very southern part of India. So what was that they attracted you to Islam?
I think, well, I was not born into a Christian family, but, you know, looking as a first-year college student around to seat myself. And at that time, looked much like this time, except there was not a pandemic, but there was a pandemic of sort of violence. And looking to seat myself, and where I went to school, a large number of the men, my class was the first class of women to live on campus. And there were a huge African, some South Asians, male student body, almost all of whom were Muslim. And listening to them try to sort out what was happening in the Muslim world. It was the Biafran War, but it was also issues with what had happened after the partition of India. I, of course, didn't know India had been partitioned, had never heard of Jinnah, but I remember sitting and listening to a young man read the Shikwat. And I said, oh, these people are really on it. You know, I mean, it sounded like the kind of lesson, it didn't matter what your ethnicity was, but the kind of lesson that you needed to hear. And I was very attracted. And we will not say how many years ago that was.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you, Professor Al-Deen. So those who wanted to ask the question or wanted to engage in a conversation, please raise your hand or put your request in chat box. Okay, so now I see the next one. Nawab Siddiqui Saab, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Muslims in America support Black lives. However, they may be afraid to show it. So could you comment on that?
Why?
Because of the cultural backgrounds, and we are afraid that we may be classified some ways and later be punished.
But trust me, you're already classified. You know, and if it came to, you know, this unfortunately is a country where divide and conquer has always been the thing. And this is why I said that Muslims have missed an opportunity. Islam brought in the luggage and in the hearts of Muslims in this country, had an opportunity to say, you know, we are not going to be deterred by skin color, socioeconomic class. We have a larger agenda here. And just like our prophet, had we stood against injustice loudly, the voices who stand for injustice would have had to recede. You know, I don't think, you know, in back in the day when African Americans and some Latinos and Native Americans fought to have and gave up their lives to have the immigration policies change. So the people from other countries, they weren't looking at whether they were Muslim or Hindu or anything, could come here. They didn't stop to think, well, let me see what their religion is. And, oh, you know, I might get hurt. But it was a necessity to have the diversity that let many ethnic communities come here.
Thank you, Professor Al-Deen. So next person is Muazzam Siddiqui. After that, Pratap Behra Saab. Muazzam Saab, please go ahead and mute yourself.
Thank you, Sister Aminah. I'm so grateful that you pointed out
Where is
some
it?
of the basic problems that we have, especially, I mean, the South Asian Muslims. Because of our background, you know, India has the most ancient caste system in the world, and one of the worst caste system that you find ever in any society. So unfortunately, Indian Muslims are, uh, they grew up in that environment, and in their subconscious, you know, this uh, feeling of, you know, if I want to use the word racism, so we have this in our unconscious, and which is very much contrary to the basic teachings of Islam, to the message of Quran. And it is about time that we, you know, move forward and stretch our hand to our American, African American Muslim friends, and the society in general of African Americans. And hopefully we do not pass this on to our children. And I am hopeful that our next generation will be free of this uh, ingrained racism within ourselves. And I'm so grateful. And there are some organizations in the Chicago area, as you pointed out, there are some Muslim women involved in that, and all over the United States, there are some. So can you mention some of these organizations that you are aware of, and you are also cooperating with them and participating in their activities?
Well, I would like to see more participate. You know, I have learned the most about Islam from women. Indian women, Arab women, Chinese women, Muslim women. I have learned it through learning how to cook food from various regions, how to appreciate what they value, and to add it to my list of things that I value. How to raise children. You know, all of those things become important, I think. Here in California, one group I'm trying my best to support, because I don't want to see them disappear, is Muslim Arc, because it's an anti-racist collaborative group. And what they're working on doing is to get to that nitty gritty of the majority population for whom we seem to pose a threat. They're not sure what the threat is, but in Sunday school, they learn that Islam is here to kill Christianity, that Muslims are terrorists and we want to take over. So combating those people, not the ones in interreligious dialogue, but combating where the real threat lies, is some of the work of Muslim Arc. The we have a huge problem. I mentioned it earlier. I also sit on the board at Iman, and we fight so much on many different levels. One of the great things about Iman is it represents the Muslim diversity that there is. I think that many of the young people, and I think that you're right, they're not like you. Some of them are, but many of them are not like their parents, much to the parents' chagrin, and I'm going to disinherit you and I'm going to do a whole bunch of other things. And a lot of the kids have said, well, take your money and I'll see you later. I've learned to listen to music I did not think I would be listening to at my age. You know, I'm listening to their spoken word. They're doing a kind of cultural fusion that is, I mean, it's invigorating. They have aspirations to sit on city councils, to be older people, to get in state Congress and US Congress. They're doing some very, very interesting things. We also still have an older crowd who doesn't want to let go.
Yep.
As if we haven't taught our kids enough, you know, and we don't trust them. So we don't want to let go. We don't want to support their vision, which is going to be different than ours has been, but it's going to be foundationally what ours has been evolved. I don't know if that makes sense. One young man I had on Critical Talk, he is going to be a physicist, but he's also a chef. He's 15. He was in the program, and you can look at it on Muslim Network TV, teaching about the spices and how they're good for this in your health and that in your health, and cooking his heart out. But I know that he's going to be a physicist. You know?
Thank you, Prof.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to say more?
No.
It's okay. Thank you. Pratap Behra, Mr. Pratap Behra, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I have a very, even a small question. It is rather a curiosity, less of a question. I see, you know, these two terms, ethnicity, one side, and religion or religiosity, the other side. So in some cases, we see a community diverse, heterogeneous in terms of ethnicity, but singular religion or faith system. And opposite situation is also there. So, you know, the permutations and combinations vary from, you know, place to place. So somewhere it is ethnically diverse, somewhere it is, you know, faith system wise diverse. You know, there are very few cases where ethnicity is singular and faith system is also singular. Those are exceptional cases. Otherwise, at least one side is diverse and heterogeneous. That is the most case as I perceive across the societies, across different countries, nations. So in such a situation, and because of this heterogeneity, and because the way it has been problematized and projected and mishandled, we have been witnessing so many social problems. It is killing the society. There is some danger because of this, because of disinformation, because of mishandling. That is my assumption. So my curiosity question is how you know, this ethnicity or ethnic diversity can follow or be subservient to the religious tenets, the, you know, the religious tenets of a faith or many faiths. And I believe religions, the spiritualities, they have many things to serve the humanity. So those tenets, how should they manifest, and how these ethnic diversities which are coming on the sacred ways of the faith systems. They are really sabotaging the social role a faith system is supposed to play. So there are propaganda about a religion, this or that. Those people who know, they can tell it better. But I see often there is misrepresentation, and thereby the ethnic diversity, instead of learning from a system, a faith system, is the opposite consequences are happening. So how do we prevent this? One thing that you were talking about is that inter-religion dialogue that I underlined, inter-religious dialogue, but then I want more of it.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Pratap.
thank you.
So, Professor Al-Deen, you got it. He's talking about the ethnicity and the monolith or religion. And there are different ethnic background with the same religion. And how do you reconcile?
Well, I think what you all have done here by inviting different people is one sure way to hear different opinions. But I think we must have we must have more frequent non-emergency conversations. Do you know what I mean? We just got to talk more often when it is not critical, because conversations only cease to be sensitive when you talk about them all the time and you find different ways to approach them.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Syed Hussain Saab, unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much. It was really pleasure. I really enjoyed, and you raised a lot of good ideas and questions as well. And let me clarify one thing that South Asian Association with the white is perhaps lies in this fact that a fair complexion has been generally it is favored all over the world perhaps, but especially in India, this is a craze. I mean, perhaps what I heard is that the whitening cream is being used in India, perhaps equal to the all over the world. So it's not that religion. Personally, and a lot of my friends, when they see a black Muslim, we really feel much better with him than a white Muslim, because somehow he looks like will be more faithful to the religion than him. This is the impression. I don't know if it's right or not. So my statement is that we do not, as far as I'm concerned, it is the, the fair complexion is better than dark complexion, feeling which I think it is very, very taken root in India. And I think it is to a better part of the world as well, like Arabs also think that they are white. And that's why they should be part of this white people. So that's my, can you comment on that? And the second thing I wanted to mention, that our association with Trump, I heard from other people, I don't like him myself, but they said that Trump did not invade or support terrorist activities to topple existing governments. Exception. Obama did, both Bushes did, and Reagan did, and all that. So that was one reason I heard. So I would like you to comment on that as well. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
I think that, you know, Americans' political environment is no more complicated than anybody else's. But I think that back to your first statement, isn't it amazing that most of the people in the world are of color, and those who have perpetrated whiteness as a standard are the minority? And that makes sense. You know, I don't want to be a minority. I want you all to aspire to be like me, and I'll kill you if you don't. The other thing is, I can't say, I think people had many reasons to support Mr. Trump, even if it wasn't in their own best interest. Because even if Trump were president today, he could not have stayed out of the other countries' businesses for long. Do you see what I'm saying? Because we depend on those other countries for too many things. I think the issues of ethnicity and religion have become what they call foils for ignoring some more important issues, like poverty, like homelessness, like starvation, like the loss of potable water. All of those things are far more important to handle than not so much religion, but ethnicity. I was watching a program in India the other day that talked about Zoroastrianism and how they've gotten so in their bubble that they're dying off. So now they're panicked, you know, oh my God, we made it a sin to marry somebody other than another Zoroastrian. Now we got to take it back. You know, I mean, all of those things, and overlooking the dire poverty, the economic imbalances in the world, you know, is something wrong with that. You know, so I think that the plays on focusing all of our attention on one thing and not on the other. I mean, for example, we got so focused on the election that we didn't realize that in Virginia, they had a mock constitutional convention, which would deport most of the Muslims in this country. They were moving to see how far they could float various amendments and which amendments they could take back. That was far more, you know, I mean, it got to work as well as it did because people were focused on an election and unable to focus on more than one thing at a time.
Thank you. Next is Iram Gul and then Dr. Raziuddin. Unmute yourself, Iram.
Thank you, Rafa. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum, Ma'am Aminah. Ma'am, I did some research on
I can't hear you.
Iram, we can't hear you.
In US and Nation of Islam, and it was very,
no, Iran.
No, you can listen me now. Hello.
Yeah. Okay, it's better. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Ma'am, I was saying that I did some research in my MPhil on Muslim organization in USA like ISNA, ICNA, and Nation of Islam. And it was really an amazing experience to know the struggle of African Americans for their human rights in US society. I want to know that in this situation, these organizations are working together or they are confined within their limits to cope this situation that is prevailing nowadays in the world? Thank you.
To my knowledge, ICNA and ISNA, well, they kind of work together on occasion, but they don't work with many of the African American Muslim groups. They also don't work with, until it becomes something that they want the papers to report. I'm trying to remember a couple of conferences that I went to where they had groups for, no, special spaces for Latino Muslims, but because none of them spoke Spanish, they didn't have a clue as to what was being said in those groups. So I don't think that the groups are actually working together. The other African American Muslim communities outside of the nation may have a little bit more camaraderie, not much, with some of the immigrant organizations.
Thank you, Professor Al-Deen. And the last person is Dr. Raziuddin. And Abdul Jabbar Saab, do you really have something very pressing? Because you raised your hand again, then I will end up with Raziuddin Saab. Please be brief.
Yes. So I think regarding, we all came here, at least I came here to this country 40 years ago through the prism of the US as a scientific technological prowess, not for any social, political understanding of this country. So we kind of drove that thing into our children as well, to become a good in their studies. I think that's really the problem, I think, in terms of, and then we come here, we learn, try to understand the cultural, political dynamics of the US. I just wanted to make that comment. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Muazzam Saab covered that point. Go ahead, Dr. Raziuddin.
Oh, well, thank you. You didn't ask any question. That is surprising. You should ask one question and then I can go.
No, go ahead.
All right.
I am fine.
Okay. So I think since it is more in a conversational mode, I think what has to be acknowledged by Indian subcontinent's Muslims here in America is that though, at least from the Muslims who came from India, they came from a plural society. They should have participated in the struggles here with the minorities, and they did not. That acknowledgement we should do. And slowly, a lot of them, I think in this decade, they are coming to acknowledge this, recognize this, and becoming slowly part of it. I think one of my activist friend who is from Black Lives Matter is right here, Mujahid Muhammad, I think he is still here. And so what I'm saying is that besides being more tuned to career and good profession and all those, that's a mindset of migrants. We are slowly coming out of our shell. It is really, it was lacking from our part. It is not really a fear from whites or anybody, because we were always in a good shape here. So we didn't suffer from any kind of complex. It was our more like selfish interest of focusing on our career. And that slowly, when our kids started becoming more and more grown, they actually taught us back that you have to be more fuller participant in the society, as most of them are. They are very much in league with all the issues of human rights, civil rights, Black Lives Matter, gender issues, and we are learning a lot from them and adjusting with that and becoming more mainstream. And I think most of Muslims or non-Muslims from India are very much part of Black Lives Matter now. Still, maybe they are not tuned to go in the demonstration that much, but also you can see a big number now, at least since, and especially during the Trump era. But one contradiction is there. Muslims like coming here, like from Indian subcontinent or Arabs and others, they do have these things in their DNA, this race thing, because they either born or converted, but they do have this DNA, the race DNA is there. And that issue comes up. And we should acknowledge very honestly, Indians, Muslims or non-Muslims alike, they have in their DNA the same nature, same thing. Perhaps Islam does a little better in that sense to take out that kind of biases, but still we suffer from it. And perhaps we should learn and become more better in participant as a model citizen or as an activist citizen. That's all we can say. And so with that, I think we should end up this thing, this event. And before that, Faisal, can you put the last slide for our next Saturday talk? Faisal, if you are there. Well, next Saturday, we have another very famous scholar who is very well known for the Indian subcontinent audience, Professor Barbara McCloud. And she is the living embodiment of a scholarship on especially Indian Muslims, Indian subcontinent Muslims. And she has done tremendous amount of work throughout her life. And please remember, time is changed because she's going to do the event from California. For her, it was a little early, so we are changing 12 rather than at 11, only one time for her, because that will be 9 a.m. for her. So it will be at 12 p.m. noon, and it will be a very wonderful talk, British Raj, Nets and Networks, Islamic Scholarship in India of the Raj. And Dr. Mozam Siddiqui will be giving the opening remarks. So please join that. And Dr. Al-Deen, I will send you the fundraiser, when formal poster we will get, we will send it. But this information also I will send. And please all try to chip in as much as you can for this cause. It is really badly needed. Any dollar amount will be fine. And it is totally geared for oxygen, getting oxygen to patients and medicine and the doctors. Okay.